From little acorns, great oak trees grow. An English proverb that emphasises the importance of even the smallest of our actions, how they might grow. There are consequences that follow on from it. Drop a small pebble in a pond and what happens? Small ripples will go out and extend out and just keep going until they stop at the side of the pond or the river. They say if a butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazonian rainforest, it can set off an earthquake on the other side of the world. It seems most cultures have this idea or a proverb that speaks of the importance of even the smallest of our actions because of the ramifications that can come from it. Now, with that in mind, let me ask you, how important is a little sin? You know, just one of those little sins, not one of the big sins that usually gets preached about, the ones that we can really get upset and angry about, those little sins that we commit that we don't think really matters. And we could, of course, have a huge discussion on what might constitute a little sin, and each of us would think differently. But I think you know where I'm coming from. The incidental word spoken that might hurt someone, but you did it on purpose to cause that hurt. A short eruption of anger, just a little bit of gossip. These small matters, what does God care about them? In the Old Testament, in 2 Kings chapter 5, and in the first 14 verses there, we are given a story of a man by the name of Naaman. He's a commander in the Aramean army, well respected. They made many raids on the Israelites. They were a bit of a thorn in their side for quite some time, and in one of the raids, a little girl was taken to be a servant in his household. Well, the thing about Naaman is he contracted leprosy. And after a while, the slave girl said, well, I wish you could go and see the prophet back in my home country. He could cure you. Excuse me. And so he went to his king, and the king wrote a letter of introduction for him to go into Israel and see this prophet and therefore be cured. The king, in fact, said, I've sent my man to come over there for you to cure him. This caused terrible anguish with the Israelite king, of course. I mean, how would you feel if you were asked to do something like that? Nevertheless, after a while, the man Naaman did what Elisha told him, to dip 7 times in the dirty Jordan River, something he didn't want to do. He thought, well, there's clean rivers back home, why didn't you send me there? But even his own men said, if he asked you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? So why can't you do this? Naaman did what Elisha asked, and his leprosy was cured. In verses 15 and 16 of 2 Kings 5, we then read this. Then Naaman and his entire party went back to find the man of God. They stood before him, and Naaman said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. But Elisha replied, as surely as the Lord lives who I serve, I will not accept any gifts. And though Naaman urged him to take the gift, Elisha refused. Well, why didn't Elisha take it? The man's got plenty of money, and he was willing to give it. If we go to verse 5 of this particular chapter, we'll see that Naaman had actually taken 10 talents of silver, which is reckoned to weigh 750 pounds today, 6,000 shekels of gold, which is reckoned to weigh 150 pounds, and 10 sets of clothing as payment to anyone who healed him. He had enough to give, and he was grateful, and Elisha had done, through God, what had been asked. Why not just take it? Well, Elisha was not the one who healed Naaman, and Elisha wanted that to be known. For him to have accepted the reward for God's work would have made it appear that he was responsible for the healing. It's just a small matter, isn't it? But how important are the consequences of Elisha's actions just here? It would also seem that God's miracles were for sale. Imagine if it accepted this, Naaman went home, and the next time there was trouble, well, where can I buy a miracle now? Carrying on in 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 17 to 19, then Naaman said, all right, but please allow me to load 2 of my mules with earth from this place, and I will take it back home with me, From now on I will never again offer burnt offerings or sacrifices to any other god except the Lord. However, may the Lord pardon me in this one thing. When my master the king goes into the temple of the god Rimmon to worship there and leans on my arm, may the Lord pardon me when I bow too." "Go in peace," Elisha said. So Naaman started home again. Naaman actually says, if you want to take this money, then give me some of your dirt. Give me some soil from your ground. Why would Naaman need Elisha's soil to build his altar? Well, it seems that he attached some holiness to the ground at Elisha's place. Naaman still had polytheistic ideas, even though he said, now, I believe there's only one true God. And in polytheism, each area had its own God, and God was restricted to that place. Next best thing to do then is to take a bit of that soil, take it home with him, so he can worship this one true God of Elisha. It would be like us thinking that God could only be worshipped in a building which had the name Church of Christ painted on its side or over its doorway. Is that what it is? Are we restricting God to a certain area? Can he only be worshipped there? Of course not. Naaman, when he went home, could worship God just as much as if he was in Israel, just as much as if he was on the garden of Elisha. And the same for us. Our worship can be all day, every day, wherever we are. Look again at verse 18 as well. Was Naaman asking for advance forgiveness for a small sin? Can we get advanced exemption for sins we intend to commit? Locally in the news, it speaks internationally about an outgoing president who has given a pardon in advance for some people that might be convicted of something when the new president comes in. Do we treat God like that as well? Do we think, well, it doesn't matter if I sin because, well, I can get forgiveness? We know better than Naaman. Something strange is going on here, but we'll come back to it. In 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 20 and 22, we continue to read in this account, "But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, my master should not have let this Aramean get away without accepting any of his gifts. As surely as the Lord lives, I will chase after him and get something from him." So Gehazi set off after Naaman. When Naaman saw Gehazi running after him, he climbed down from his chariot and went to meet him. "Is everything all right?" Naaman asked. "Yes," Gehazi said, "but my master has sent me to tell you that 2 young prophets from the hill country of Ephraim have just arrived. He would like 75 pounds of silver and 2 sets of clothing to give them." Well, in verse 16, Elisha had just sworn an oath to the one true God that Naaman now believed in, that he would not take anything. So what's going on here? Naaman, remember, is the commander of the army that's been attacking Israel. Don't they deserve something from him for all the trouble that they've given? So Gehazi perhaps thinks that Elijah's been too easy on Naaman against this Aramean, this enemy. Gehazi's logic represents his thoughts on national honour and just deserts for a foreign invader. He's not thinking about God and the bigger picture. He's thinking about what's taking place in his own life. Do you think Gehazi seriously believed what he was saying? Or could he be lying to himself? Gehazi took the greed of his heart and painted it with patriotism. The reason he gives for his action is not the reason that's really in his heart. When we pray for something, are our motives pure? Lord, give me a brand new car. With a brand new car, I could reach out to so many more people by getting around easier, and I can give people a ride to church. Lord, give me a bigger house so I've got some extra rooms, and then I could be far more hospitable. And you want me to be hospitable, Lord. It's part of your will for me, isn't it? So give me a bigger house so I can do this. Well, it might be true that we can use our possessions, whatever they are, for the glory of God. But we've got to be careful what our motive is. Where are we placing the importance really? Is it for our own comfort, or is it so we can truly serve God? Gehazi might have been doing just this, convincing himself that, well, it's for the glory of God that I take something from this enemy of Israel. A man like Naaman must have been quite clever. He must have been a good judge of character to have risen to the position that he's in. He must know about people and be able to read them. So why did he go ahead and give something now to Gehazi? Surely he can think in his mind of the words that Elisha said, I will not take anything. Well, Gehazi is quite clever too. And again, he covered his tracks and his motive by saying, well, it wasn't for Elisha, so he's not taking stuff for himself. That's still true. He's using this for some young prophets that have come to visit. So what about Elisha accepting it? It was for someone else. And what about us? What we ask for, are we pretending it's not for us? It's for someone else, and then if they don't want it, well, perhaps I can have it. So he lied about Elisha. He lied to himself, and he lied to Naaman. Continuing on in verses 23 and 24, by all means take twice as much silver, Naaman insisted. He gave him 2 sets of clothing, tied up the money in 2 bags, and sent 2 of his servants to carry the gifts for Gehazi. But when they arrived at the citadel, Gehazi took the gifts from the servants and sent the men back. Then he went and hid the gifts inside the house. Naaman, it seems, has no doubts about Gehazi's story, or if he does, he's so grateful he wants to give the stuff over to him anyway. Why did Gehazi take over carrying the things when he came to the hill? It was all part of the deceit. He couldn't let those servants go with him and see that he wasn't taking it to Elisha. He couldn't risk Elisha asking them what they were doing there. So he said, I can take it from here, chaps. You get back. You'll be wanting to get home. And that way he could secretly hide the stuff in his own house. But anyway, verses 25 to 27 didn't quite work out the way he expected. When he went in to his master, Elisha asked him, Where have you been, Gehazi? I haven't been anywhere, he replied. But Elisha asked him, Don't you realize that I was there in spirit when Naaman stepped down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to receive money and clothing, olive groves and vineyards, sheep and cattle, and male and female servants? Because you have done this, you and your descendants will suffer from Naaman's leprosy forever. When Gehazi left the room, he was covered with leprosy. His skin was white as snow. Where have you been? Nowhere. What are you doing? Nothing. What have you got? I haven't got anything. These are regular conversations if you've got kids, aren't they? When your children answer in this way, at least they're quoting scripture. But you know something's up, and there's no answer that they can give. So, I haven't been doing anything. Elisha says, Was not my spirit with you? He knew what Gehazi had done. The Holy Spirit had revealed it to him, obviously. But what do olive groves and flocks and servants have to do with Gehazi's sin? He took clothes and silver. If it was double what he asked, he had 150 pounds of silver. If you know what the price of an ounce of silver is today, 150 pounds is like a small fortune. So what was happening? Elisha didn't only know where Gehazi had been and what he'd done, he even knew what he was thinking about. That money could buy an olive grove. That money could make him afford to be able to get servants. And so all these things that Elisha listed are no doubt things that were going through Gehazi's mind that he was going to spend his money on. There's no doubt that Elisha knew exactly what Gehazi was up to. Well, the penalty for Gehazi's sin was leprosy, forever. But isn't this a victimless crime? I mean, why all the fuss? Elisha didn't want the money anyway, so that wasn't a problem. Naaman had plenty and to spare. He'd got a brilliant job, so he'd soon earn all that back. He won't miss it. And besides, he wanted to give the gifts away. So what's the problem? Surely, there are no victims there. In verse 26, Elisha begins by saying, Is this the time to think about all those things he said Gehazi was thinking about? Did Gehazi just have bad timing? Is that what it was all about? Perhaps, though, the timing magnifies the sin. Gehazi has lied to everyone, including himself. He's greedy. He takes property that he has no right to. And as a result, what is Naaman going to think about this one true God? Is he going to go home and think, as we said earlier, that God's gifts are for sale? That if he needs God again, he needs to pay for it rather than accept what God has as a free gift? Will he decide all he needs to do is give enough and whatever he wants is his? That it's not up to God to decide, it's up to how much you're willing to give. Remember, I told you we'd get back to Naaman's sin of bowing down to a false god. After he tells Elisha he believes in the one true God and says he will worship only him. But he says, forgive me for this, because when I go along with my master and bow down to a false god, I'll need to do it because my master's there. Why? Why lie? Why be a hypocrite? Could he be greedy just like Gehazi? Naaman wants to keep his job, and while the boss is watching, he needs to make it look like he's not serving the one true God. Who is it that changes your attitude towards God when they're watching? Who is it that you want to impress, and in order to impress them, you've got to pretend you don't believe in the one true God? Both Gehazi and Naaman have lied, really. Gehazi lied to everyone, and Naaman would be lying about his reverence to the false god to keep up appearances back home. What he should have done is gone home and tore down the altar and told his master, I've found the one true God. Why does Naaman get go in peace in verse 19 and Gehazi gets leprosy? After all, they both sinned. Well, Naaman had got it wrong. He still needed to learn some more. There was more to understand. He'd only just found the one true God. His attitude was one of favour towards God for what he'd done for him, but he still didn't fully understand. So maybe Elisha was giving him time to grow in God's grace, that ultimately he would make a stand. Gehazi knew what he was doing, and he even planned to cover it up. He should have known better. He lived with Elisha, serving him. He must have been taught much about God. So there's a big difference here. Sin is first and foremost a matter of attitude. In Matthew 15 verses 19 to 20, Jesus himself says, so if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But anyone who obeys God's laws and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. But I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. There's no room for half-baked Christianity. There's no room for a bit of faith here and a bit of faith there. There is no room for sin in our lives. The consequences of small sins can grow to where a whole nation might not accept God. As in the case of Naaman, if he didn't make a stand, how would anyone in his homeland know about the one true God if he kept it to himself, and then they'd all be lost forever? And all that because Gehazi decided, well, if my master don't want the money and he's willing to give it, I'll have it. We've got to look at the bigger picture. Where is what I'm doing now going to lead? And that can be for good or for bad. A small sin could lead to terrible consequences. But doing the right thing at the right time, all the time, how might that emanate into something wonderful for the glory of God? Let's consider what we do and why we do it, and may it come from a humble heart that's sincerely wanting to serve God. We might get it wrong at times, but those times will be less and less the more we think about what we're doing. Little sins could lead to a big disaster. So don't get involved